And also looking, frankly, at white history, um, you know, we've not been the best ethnic group in history in the world.
So how would you like to talk a little bit about how this concept, as you understand it, this concept of racism operates in our society?
Well, I think we have to go back to the patriarchal paradigm. It's a one-up, one-down way of interpreting reality. It's also a zero-sum game understanding of life. And therefore, within the patriarchal structures of our society, one person is up because another person is down. One person gains only when someone else loses. And therefore, our whole system is based on an underclass, the necessity of having an underclass. Racism is also based on white privilege, which I want to say more about later. Jim Wallace, who's the editor of Sojourners magazine and the founder of Sojourners community in the District of Columbia, a very poor area there, has written movingly about his insight that racism is, as he calls it, America's original sin. And I think there's a lot of truth there. This is what he writes. Racism originates in domination and provides the social rationale and philosophical justification for debasing, degrading, and doing violence to people on the basis of color or ethnicity. It is sustained by both personal attitudes and structural forces. Racism can be brutally overt or invisibly institutional or both. Its scope extends to every level and area of human psychology, society, and culture, and he further reminds us that the United States of America was established as a white society founded upon the near genocide of another racial group and then the enslavement of still another.
Let's talk about, as you examine it, where you see the roots of this. For example, in prior conversations, I understand that you have the point of view that racism is a white problem. What does that mean for us in America? What does that mean for individuals of different races who need to relate to one another?
Well, I think that racism is a white problem. Again, it's founded on white privilege. It's the same kind of thing I was talking to you about when the Klan came. The Klan is a white Christian group. It comes out of normative American Christianity. And therefore, in my mind, white folks ought to take care of that problem. Now, certainly, racism affects non-white people terribly, tragically, in all sorts of ways. And it's fashionable sometimes to say, well, racism hurts white people too. I think that lets us off the hook and is kind of a red herring, keeps us from really attacking the problem. I keep mentioning white privilege. Let me just mention a little bit about what I mean by this. There are lots of lists. This one I happen to get from a friend of mine with the Friends group here in town. Just kind of at random, let me go through this list. There are 39 ideas. Wow. One of them is nobody assumes that we are here at the expense of more qualified people of another race. That's an example of white privilege. Non-white people, African Americans in particular, often feel that people assume that they are there or they have their job because they beat out somebody of another race, usually white. Most of our classmates are of the same race as we are. That's a white privilege. We can worry about racism without being seen as being self-interested or self-serving. No one ever compliments us on our English. I find that a lot in our society. Again, these evidences of white privilege, and another one of them, a very mundane one, is that I can go into if I'm a woman, I can go to a drugstore and find a skin toner that matches my own skin color. And I'll bet you don't have that privilege very often going into most drugstores in America, right?
Not yet.
Okay, maybe you don't use it. I don't either, so I don't really know what I'm talking about with that. But a couple more that I think are important. The portraits on the walls look like our great-grandfathers, and not like the men who owned our great-grandfathers.
Let me ask you, given that perspective that this is a white problem, and since the majority population in the society we live in are white people, how do we use this information in a constructive way? You know that we've had, I guess you call a backlash against affirmative action. We've moved from a time in the society when it was favorable to think about, solutions to racial divisions and tensions between people. And now there seems to be a pulling away from seeing those issues as important anymore, or as important as they were some years ago. Do you have some reflection on, as a white people, a person maybe to other white people, how do you handle this information without becoming offended?
Oh, I misunderstood. How do I?
How do you offer this information to the majority of people who happen to be white, saying that this is a white problem, so that they can use it constructively and not be burdened and feel offended by it?
Well, unfortunately, when I talk to white people about this issue, I usually do at least step on toes, if not outright offend people. I don't try to. I don't think that this is offensive stuff at all. I think it's true, but the truth is sometimes hard to take. What was the rest of your question?
Well, if I'm a white person, I'm sitting here listening to another white person saying, well, we have racism, we have prejudice, we have these racial tensions, and it's my fault because I'm a white person. I have these privileges that other people don't. How can I receive a message like that and not be pissed off about it?
Well, yeah. Sometimes we interpret it too individualistically. We are programmed in our society in other ways to take on too much blame, too much guilt. Although the fact remains that to be white in America means to be part of a racist system. That's true. I wish it wasn't, but it is. And therefore, guilt is an appropriate emotion. But real guilt is designed, I think it's a gift of the higher power, and one finds this in recovery materials a lot. Guilt is a wonderful emotion that leads us to repent. Once we repent, the guilt goes away. Because
but you have to be sorry, you have to feel that it is wrong first before you can repent.
You have to be aware of the problem. It's the same thing with alcoholism or drug dependency. You have to, first of all, get through the denial. Denial is a big part of racism in this country. And be aware of your own stuff, that you have a problem. The first step in AA is, we admitted that we had a problem, basically. You have to start there before you can move on.
I would imagine that some of the denial is wrapped up in these attitudes and stereotypes and values that we've incorporated across and between races over a long period of time. So how do you move from denial to doing in a constructive way?
Well, again, the first step for me is to be aware that racism exists. To do that, I think that individual white people and white people collectively have to get in touch with the fact that their brothers and sisters who have darker skin are really suffering. And that's hard for us to do. I think the reason it's so hard is that if we really began recognizing how messed up our system is and how much damage it does, not only to non-white people in this country, but in third world countries around the world, we'd have to get angry. We'd have to change things big time. We wouldn't be able to rest until that was done. And so it's safer to be in denial.
And you talk about anger, and I guess there's something in the Christian literature, at least in the Bible, known as righteous anger. that makes some people uncomfortable. When I think about the events of the Ku Klux Klan rally and the different levels of anger that it aroused, I would be interested in your thoughts on, how you get the community to understand that it's feeling this anger and how it can best express that anger so that other people feel empathy and not fear of that anger directed against what you perceive to be morally wrong.
Well, you just outlined the solution. Getting there is difficult. For one thing, even in Ann Arbor, and maybe especially in Ann Arbor, because we have this myth that we're a wonderfully enlightened and diverse town, we're not. We're not a community. If a community is a collection of different institutions and groups that are actively communicating with each other and cooperating with each other, we don't have a community. The gap between the black community and the white community is huge. And I see this particularly in the religious community, of all places, and that should be the last place that it should exist.
What are some